Today's lesson is Myths and Facts about the Moon. Hi everybody, I'm Roger.
And I'm Helen.
And today we're going to continue talking about the moon. And we're asking you how much you know about the moon. So we're presenting this information about the moon to you in the form of a test. We're putting your knowledge of the moon to the test. We give you a statement, and then we're going to tell you whether that statement is true or false.
Right. So in the first lesson, we looked at the moon as it figures in legends. So we talked a little bit about how Asian cultures celebrated the moon and also about the fact that the moon had feminine as opposed to masculine qualities, symbolically speaking.
Yep. So we talked about the fact that the lunar calendar is used across Asia and that the moon is symbolically feminine and not masculine so much. Okay, so today we're going to talk some more about the moon. We're going to give you some statements, and then we're going to talk about whether those statements are true or false. But first, we're going to introduce today's lesson by talking a little bit about the moon. And so let's do it. Let's listen to the first part of our lesson, and then we'll come back to talk about it.
Developments in space technology have increased our understanding of the moon. Still, it remains an object of wonder. What are some scientific facts about the moon that you're familiar with? The moon is Earth's only natural satellite. True. There are over 200 moons in our solar system, and only one of them orbits our planet. And despite being about a quarter the size of Earth and 385,000 kilometers away, the moon exerts strong gravitational forces that cause changes in our ocean's tides.
大家好，第一部分我们看到名词 satellite， 意思是卫星。例如 These pictures of Mars came from a satellite. 这些火星照片是经由卫星传过来的。再来，我们看到单字 solar， 这个字是形容词，指太阳的，来自太阳的。像是 Heating for the water in this house is provided by solar panels. 这房子的热水加热是由太阳能板供应的。接着，我们看到动词 orbit， 指绕轨道运行。例如 The International Space Station is currently orbiting the Earth. 国际太空站目前绕行地球轨道运行。另外补充，含有 orbit 在内的片语 come into one's orbit 意思是进入某人的圈子。像是After graduating from university, my sister came into the well-known designer's orbit. 在大学毕业后，我姐姐进入了那位知名设计师的圈子。
So developments in space technology have increased our understanding of the moon. Still, it remains an object of wonder. So over the past 100 years or so, a lot of developments in space technology have allowed us to understand the moon more. So maybe in the past, we looked at the moon and wondered how big it was, how far it was, whether any living things were on the moon. But with developments in space technology and science, we have begun to understand the moon more and more. However, regardless of all of these developments, we are still fascinated by the moon. We still wonder, what is it all about? And is it possible to go live there, to travel there? And it still presents a lot of questions.
Yep, today we're going to be talking about some scientific aspects of the moon. Last time we talked about more legendary cultural aspects of the moon, whether the moon is used in lunar calendars in Asia, whether calendars are based on lunar cycles in Asia, and then we also talked about whether the moon can affect human behavior, more specifically moonlight. And, of course, we also talked about the fact that the moon is considered feminine in a lot of cultures. But we've got some scientific questions about the moon in today's program. So here's the first statement. Is it true or false? The moon is Earth's only natural satellite.
Right. So first of all, to understand whether this statement is true or false, we have to define the word satellite. A satellite in this context is a natural object that moves around a planet. However, a satellite can also be something other than a natural object. It can be a man-made object. A man-made object that's sent into space to travel around the Earth to receive and send information. So that can also be a satellite. But in this case, we're talking about a natural object that moves around the planet.
If somebody mentions the word satellite, we usually think of those machines that are orbiting the Earth, like communications satellites or spy satellites or whatever. So if we're talking about moons of a planet, we tend to call them natural satellites. Like the moon, well, is that the only natural satellite of the Earth? Of course, there are natural satellites orbiting around Jupiter. The main four natural satellites or moons of Jupiter are Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. But in this particular case, we're asking this question, is the moon the Earth's only natural satellite? Is there another moon out there somewhere? Well, it's true. The moon is the only natural satellite of the Earth. There is no other moon orbiting the Earth.
Right. There are over 200 moons in our solar system, and only one of them orbits our planet. So Earth belongs to the solar system. The word solar means relating to or coming from the sun. Remember before we talked about the word lunar. So lunar is a word that means relating to the moon, and solar means relating to the sun. So there are 200 moons in our solar system, the system of planets and stars that go around the sun, and only one of them orbits our planet. So out of these 200 moons, only one moon orbits our planet. And the word orbit here means to go around an object that is larger than the object that's moving.
Right, so the moon orbits the Earth orbits the sun, etc. And, of course, only one of these 200 moons in the solar system orbits the Earth. And despite being about a quarter the size of Earth, and 385,000 kilometers away, the moon exerts strong gravitational forces that cause changes in our ocean's tides. So even though the moon is only 1/4 the size of the Earth, and even though it is so far away, it still exerts strong gravitational forces. So here we've got the verb to exert, which means it influences something in a certain way, or it actually gives this thing to that other thing. It brings a force to bear on something else. And indeed, the moon is exerting gravity on the Earth. And I think some scientists say that without that gravitational pull of the moon, life never would have existed on the Earth.
Right. So here, gravitational forces refer to those forces that make two objects move towards each other. And the most common example of a gravitational force is when something falls to the ground. So if you see an apple falling from a tree to the ground, why does it fall to the ground instead of falling upwards? Well, it has to do with gravitational force.
Right. So the moon applies strong gravitational forces, and that causes changes in our ocean's tides. We have high tide and we have low tide, etc., etc. Yeah, the moon and the sun both combine to affect the tides in the ocean. Of course, tides are very important here in Taiwan for fishermen and for shipping vessels and things like that. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's go on now, continuing with our quiz. The next statement is all about the temperatures on the moon. Is it hot or is it cold?
Temperatures on the moon are mild. False. On the contrary, the moon has extreme temperatures with daytime highs near the lunar equator reaching 120 degrees Celsius and nighttime lows dropping to -130 degrees Celsius. This wide range of temperatures is due to the fact that the moon lacks a protective atmosphere to regulate heat from the sun.
第二部分，我们看到单字 atmosphere 表示大气层、大气或者是气氛。我们可以说 Earth's atmosphere protects us and we can't live without it. 地球的大气层保护我们，我们没有它活不下去。或者 The atmosphere of the restaurant was perfect for 2 people on a date. 这间餐厅有绝佳的气氛，适合2个人的约会。再来，我们看到动词 regulate， 意思是调节、控制或是管理，像是 This device regulates the temperature in the room. 这个装置调节房间里的温度。或是 Politicians have suggested introducing new laws to better regulate the internet. 政治人物建议立新法来更有效规范网际网路。另外补充这个字的名词 regulation 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 表示规章或是规定。举例来说 According to regulations, everyone in the work area must wear a helmet. 根据规定，在工作区域的每个人都必须戴安全帽。
So the next statement is temperatures on the moon are mild. So the word mild here refers to something that is neither too hot nor too cold, too strong or too weak. So you can say that a child has a fever, but it's only a mild fever, meaning it's not a very high fever. Or you can say that this dish is spicy, but the spiciness is mild. So it's just a bit spicy, but not too much. And the question or the statement is temperatures on the moon are mild, meaning it's neither too hot nor too cold. Is it true?
Right. You could describe the weather in Taipei during the fall as being mild. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. But we're asking questions about the moon here. Are temperatures on the moon mild? Well, that's false. It's not true. We don't have mild temperatures on the moon. We have extreme temperatures there. On the contrary, the moon has extreme temperatures, with daytime highs near the lunar equator reaching 120 degrees Celsius and nighttime lows dropping to minus 130 degrees Celsius. Now remember, a day on the moon is about 30 days long or 28 days long. So, of course, you've got extreme temperatures. If you're on the side of the moon that is in the sunlight, it's going to be very hot. You're going to have an extreme temperature, and that'll be really high, about 120 degrees Celsius. And then if you're on the dark side of the moon during the night, well, the lows can drop to minus 130 degrees Celsius. So that's also an extreme temperature. Extreme means really far to one side or really far to the other side, not in the middle.
And take note of the phrase here, on the contrary, which begins the first sentence of this section. So we had mentioned that the title of this section is Temperatures on the Moon are Mild. So that is a statement, and we said that this statement is false. So here we have the phrase on the contrary, which is used when you want to emphasize that something is true, even though something that you had just said was the opposite. So that's why you would say on the contrary, because the temperatures on the moon are actually very extreme. So it's contrary to the statement, temperatures on the moon are mild.
Yep. Now, when I was in elementary school, of course, I knew a girl whose name was Sonia, and I thought she was really, really mean. And I told my best friend Kevin that I think Sonia is really, really mean. And he said, oh, on the contrary, she's actually a really nice girl if you get to know her. So yes, as Helen said, on the contrary is used to talk about the opposite of something. Are temperatures on the moon mild? No, on the contrary, the temperatures are extreme. It can be really, really hot and really, really cold depending on where you are. And this wide range of temperatures is due to the fact that the moon lacks a protective atmosphere to regulate heat from the sun. So yeah, we don't have an atmosphere going around the moon to move temperatures around like we have here on the Earth. It never gets really cold at night. It gets cooler at night, but it doesn't get really freezing cold. That's because the atmosphere, this layer of air around the Earth, is constantly moving those temperatures around, so we never have extreme temperatures like we have on the moon. So again, an atmosphere refers to a layer of air or a bunch of air around a planet. Earth has an atmosphere. Mars has a thin atmosphere. And the moon Titan around Saturn has a very dense atmosphere.
Right, and this atmosphere regulates heat from the sun. The word regulate means to control something so that that thing will work in the way that you want it to. So if you regulate heat, you're not really blocking out all of the heat from the sun. You're letting some heat in and you're blocking some out so that it creates the perfect temperature.
Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Now let's talk about whether or not there is water on the moon.
There is water on the moon. True. Water exists in the form of ice both on and beneath the moon's surface. Trapped within minerals, the ice was detected in areas of the moon that never see sunlight. These dark, cold conditions are able to preserve the ice and keep it from melting.
最后第三部分，我们看到单字 preserve 这个字是动词，指保存、维护或是维持。例如 The city's old buildings and churches should be preserved. 这座城市的古老建筑和教堂应受到保存。也可以说 These rules are used to preserve the trees in this forest. 这些规定用于保护这座森林里的树木。
So the next statement is, there is water on the moon. And quite simply, the statement is true. Water exists in the form of ice both on and beneath the moon's surface. So if we want to talk about water on the moon, we have to consider it in the form of ice. And ice can be found not only on the surface of the moon, on the ground, or on lunar hills or lunar mountains, but it's also beneath the moon's surface. So you would dig into the ground of the moon and you would find ice there too.
Right. It's kind of hard to believe when you look at the moon. It looks like a barren, dry place, like one big, gigantic desert. So how could there be water up there on the moon? And if there were water on the moon, wouldn't the hot temperatures of the sun make it evaporate into space? But it turns out there is actually water on the moon in the form of ice, both on the surface and under the surface of the moon. Trapped within minerals, the ice was detected in areas of the moon that never see sunlight. So there are parts of the moon at the poles that don't see sunlight. Sometimes sunlight does shine there, but you've got these craters that kind of go into the ground, and so the sunlight will never shine into those craters, and therefore it will never be hot enough to evaporate the ice there. The ice has probably been there for millions of years.
Yes, and these dark, cold conditions are able to preserve the ice and keep it from melting. So because these areas never see the light of the sun or the heat from the sun and therefore remain dark and cold, that's why the ice there has been able to be preserved. When you preserve something, you keep it from being destroyed. So how do you destroy ice? Well, you would melt it but this ice never melts, so it's preserved and it's kept from melting.
Exactly. So you might not care that there is water on the moon, but someday China or the United States might put moon bases on the moon, and they'll need to have water from someplace. They might head to those craters and get that ice. Hey, we might have a big war on the moon fighting over that ice. It is an important point to consider. So that answers the question of whether or not there is water on the moon. It is true. It does seem that they only discovered that reality fairly recently, within the last maybe 20 or 30 years.
So we've looked at a few facts about the moon. Some facts were related to legends and others were related to the science of the moon, to space exploration. So we found that we still have a lot to learn about the moon because it's so far away, it's been with us forever, but it's obviously a very important aspect of our lives.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our lesson for today. It's time now to listen to our Chinese teacher, Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第二部分有一句写到，这么大的温度范围是因为月球缺乏保护性的大气层来调节来自太阳的热能。文中它是用到 due to the fact 再接 that 子句去表达因为怎么样，由于怎么样。我们先来看片语介系词 due to， 它后面常常是接名词或动名词去说明原因。可是现在如果你要在 due to 后面接子句的话，我们必须先加上同位语 the fact， 写作 due to the fact， 然后再接 that 子句，所以你不能 due to 就直接接子句咯。好，那其实这个 due to the fact that 主词加动词，这个意思其实就会跟 because 主词加动词这样的意思差不多了。举例来说 The meeting was cancelled due to the fact that several board members were out of town。会议取消呢，是因为好几位董事会成员人在外地。那如果你要比较口语、比较平常的用法呢，你就可以用 because several board members were out of town 就可以了。好，我们接着读到课文最后一句，这些黑暗寒冷的环境可以保存冰，并防止它融化。那文中是用 preserve 来表达保存，我们就来区分一下 preserve、conserve 和 reserve 这三个动词的差异哦。首先 preserve 它当动词有保存、维护或是维持的意思。那我们来详细的看，第一个我们可以用 preserve 用来只说维持某事物原本的样子啊，或是维持良好的状态，也可以表达使什么什么免于受损，免于受到伤害摧毁。那我们就常常会用 preserve 这个动词去表达维护历史建筑啊，保存某个文化、传统等等的。那再来 preserve 它还可以表达维持保存食物的新鲜，不让它腐烂。像我们可以说 salt can be used to preserve food， 盐可以用来保存食物。好，再看到 conserve 它当动词有保存、保护、节省的意思。那我们来细看哦，第一个我们可以用 conserve 来表达说使什么安全，免于伤害摧毁。当这个意思来解释时，其实它意思就跟 preserve 差不多。那我们还常常用 conserve 去表达可能像保护自然资源啊，保护森林、保护野生动物，使自然环境免于遭受破坏，也就是表达保护的那种意思。好，再来呢，我们说 conserve 还有节省的意思，它可以表达节约使用，你就可以用 conserve energy 节省能源， conserve water 节约用水等等。接着看到 reserve 当动词，它有保存、保留、预约、预定的意思。好，那么来细看，第一个保存、保留这个意思呢，通常是指说你预先保留某事物，以便日后可以使用，或者是说专门要留给某种特定用途啊，或者是保留给某人的意思。假设你有一块很棒的牛排，你想要留到某天生日的时候再煎，也许像这样吧。好，第二个呢，我们可以用预约、预定的意思。那这时候 reserve 常常用来表达例如预定饭店房间啊、餐厅位子啊、机票等等。像 reserve a table for 4 就是预定一桌4个人的位置。好，那以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天的单字吧。
Satellite. Mars has 2 satellites, Phobos and Deimos. Solar. The house uses solar power for all of its energy needs. Orbit. The spacecraft will orbit Earth 3 times before returning to the surface. Mild. The weather's quite mild, so it's a good day for a walk in the park. Atmosphere. The atmosphere of Mars is not capable of supporting human life. Regulate. The air conditioning unit regulates the office temperature. Preserve. The body had been preserved in ice for thousands of years.
Discussion starter starts now!
Here is our discussion starter for our program today. The question is, what moon myth or fact were you most surprised or interested to learn about, and why?
Well, it was interesting to learn that the moon actually had extreme temperatures because I was always under the impression that the temperature on the moon was mild or even just cool and perhaps cold all the time.
Well, it was interesting for me to learn that certain cultures in the South Pacific referred to a goddess there as Hina. And of course, there are probably all sorts of legends all over the world, including in Asia, Africa, and South America, etc. All these cultures and civilizations have stories related to the moon. I'd like to find out what they are and how they explain certain phenomena in the natural world. Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoyed reading along with us. I am Roger.
I'm Helen.
See you next time.